Hello and good afternoon. I'm Rich Pessork. I'm the CEO of UncommonX. We are an IT and cybersecurity company based in Chicago. As you can see, my lovely background is actually real, live river north of Chicago, not one of those fake backgrounds. So we're going live for real today. And I'm very pleased today to be joined by Jeremy Miller. Jeremy is the Director of Technology at Middlebury Community Schools in Indiana. Jeremy is a longtime customer of ours, and I'm very pleased to have him here today. He has some very direct, relevant experience in this marketplace, and I know a lot about what he's done, so we're glad to have him on today. Also joined by Rod Call. Rod Call is the Director of Cybersecurity. He's really the General Manager of a very significant practice being built at ACP CreativIT, which is a conglomerate of companies. Rod, you might want to say a few things about ACP and our partnership together.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Rich. As Rich indicated, I lead the cybersecurity practice, and I've been in cybersecurity for more than 25 years in various roles as a practitioner and a senior leader. Also, just to underscore what Rich was saying about the ACP family of companies, we are an IT service provider with deep expertise in cybersecurity, cloud, infrastructure, endpoint and end user devices, managed services, and audio-visual services. We're a reseller and a service provider with hubs in Chicago, Boston, Green Bay, Duluth, Minnesota, and satellite locations throughout the U.S. I'm happy to be here today, and I think it's a very important topic, and I'm happy to participate with such a distinguished panel. Thanks, Rich.
Great. Thank you, Rod. So as you can see from the title, today our goal is to provide you with some overview and insight and some actions you can take with respect to cyber resilience and tangible strategies for improving cybersecurity in K-12 schools. Our agenda today is understand the current landscape in K-12 and the types of risk and resiliency that you should be aware of within K-12. Talk about securing more funding for IT. This is not specific to education, but for everyone out there, they are coming for you. So you need to understand how to get the protection you need and how to fund it appropriately within your organization. We also are going to share some tips on how to maximize return on investment. Almost everyone we're working with today is trying to balance the needs and the demands of their budget and the needs and demands of their operations to keep them resilient. And we're going to talk about some very specific tasks on how to promote cyber resilience to make sure that you have some things you can take away from today that don't require any expenditure other than some good thinking and some best practices adoption. Of course, we're happy to help you understand some other ways in which you can improve your environments, and we'll talk about that a bit at the end. Rod has some assessments that he's been bringing to the table for clients we think will be applicable to many of the attendees here today. And then we're going to have a Q&A session. All right, well, let's proceed. So, recent headlines. I'm sure that every one of you wakes up every morning like I do and looks at a number of news feeds that tell you about the cyber risk and the ransomware and the breaches that are affecting the marketplace. And just in the last few months, we've seen headlines from the Los Angeles Times, from Dark Reading, from the Twin Cities Press. Many different organizations are hit by different types of cyber attacks. It could be ransomware, it could be a breach, it could be a data breach. There could be many different ways in which your schools are affected. And what we're seeing is it's increasing. Despite all the tools that are being put in place and all the activities people are embracing, we're still finding this to be a recurring challenge and one that's getting more costly for every organization. We could talk a bit about this. And Rod, why don't you, I think you're doing a lot of work with folks here. Do you want to share a bit of some of the common things you're seeing in the marketplace around this?
Yeah, thanks, Rich. I would say that all of us, as you said, are seeing this every day. And unfortunately, there's just a common path that we're watching the attackers take. These folks are, obviously motivated financially. And as such, they're looking for the easiest way to make a buck. I don't know a better way to say it, right? It's like return on investment 101. How can they spend the least amount of time and make the most money? What we're seeing most often is that bad actors are taking advantage of, still, believe it or not, weak credentials. They're compromising passwords that they can just brute force, meaning, try several attempts and break into them, or they're going to the dark web and they're paying for or taking free from services credentials that are known compromised and trying them against systems. Once they get in, they escalate their privileges, begin moving laterally, and then do the havoc of removing and deleting backup, and then encrypting systems. And then unfortunately, folks are seeing a screen letting them know that they've been compromised and are now victim of a ransomware attack. Unfortunately, this happens every day. As Rich said, I see the same feeds, and I see potential customers of ours that unfortunately end up reaching out to us to help with the incident response. I would much rather be in front of that, and then I'm eager today to work with Rich through this conversation and the other folks that are on the panel with us to talk about how UncommonX helps alleviate that by finding those indicators of compromise well before those bad actors are able to move laterally in an environment.
Yep. That's an excellent point, Rod. And I think, one thing I want to emphasize is, there's never a good time to start, but the worst time to start is when you have an incident already happening. And Jeremy, you might be able to comment a bit. We have a fairly anonymous case study here to share, but I think you know a bit about this one.
Yeah, so we are this case study. Basically, we woke up Christmas Eve morning on 2019 to basically a ransomware attack, the Ryuk strain. And it was, as Rod had mentioned, it was a weak password, weak credentials on a vendor account, we believe, that started that access into our network. And they probably sat there for a while. I think UncommonX suggested maybe up to a month, trying to gather as much information as they could. And it was catastrophic. We were down over Christmas break. And luckily, we're able to have some semblance of recovery by the time all of our teachers came back in January. But overall, it was a months-long process to fully recover from that event.
Yep. And that's what we see. One of the biggest impacts that you look at when you have an incident is the time to recover. So there's a cost to put new systems in place. There's the opportunity cost of not having your systems operational. There's the impact on students who can't access needed files, and the district itself then has liability about completing the actual number of days and the credentials it needs to complete the year. And this is really something that we see quite often. And it's interesting. You think, oh, school districts, right? Well, one of the things you have as a challenge is students, right? There's a lot of smart students out there, and guess what? Some of the really smart ones are out there trying to test the limits of your system and your security. And we've seen this as something that increasingly over the last year, we've had to help schools implement things such as MFA and some other resiliency practices to help protect themselves. But to Jeremy's point, if you do need someone to get involved, ACP and UncommonX are very good at resolving problems fast, but we hope to work with you before you have the problems. So one of the things we wanted to talk about too was, how does someone in a leadership role in IT and security in education, how do you pursue funding? And we know there's many ways in which budgets are developed. There's different constructs of school districts and communities and how they fund their operations. There's different environmental factors around government grants that vary from state to state. But one of the things that we wanted to talk about today was a bit about, how does someone go about building a business case, and how might they pursue justifying the purchase of systems that and solutions that may not have been top of mind when the budget year started. So I don't know, Rod, I mean, you've done some recent work in one of the southern states to work on grants writing and all that. If you could share some of your advice and your guidance on that, that'd be helpful. And then Jeremy will go and see kind of how you go through your process. I think these are very good learnings that the audience would benefit from.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Rich. I think just to your point with the most recent work, what I found to be very effective is, you have a funding source that you're identifying. It's already identified, it already has parameters, so you know what you're working against. I would say the next thing to have in hand is a true assessment of where you stand. And the service that we have offered and that has been very helpful in like grant writing specifically, is a NIST framework-based assessment whereby we take about 30 minutes to an hour, do a very high level assessment, and can gauge the maturity level of an organization, education and otherwise, that then begins to paint the picture and ferret out some of the points that are most salient in terms of where the needs are. And then we help draft language that will help be convincing towards the solutions that need to be implemented, and then pull those funding sources forward. So in short, it looks something like stepping through a rubric. You come with a score and a rating of the maturity in different areas, and that's where you build your case for the funding, depending on the source. Obviously, if it's very specific towards cybersecurity, then that's where, and very specific towards hardware and firewalls, then you're going to gauge the language that way. I would say a lot of times there is woeful blank spots within the administrative control side. So this is about incident response plans. It's about policy and procedure. They're just missing in many locations. And, in rural settings, especially where there's funding difficulty, it's a great way to get that filled in, because I would tell you that if you do not have an incident response plan, then you're going to be in way worse shape when an attack occurs. And so that's something that we ferret out very quickly. And it's something that we also lean into from a service standpoint. And so obviously this rubric is pointing out things that we can help with, but I think that we can also help get the funding. And that's the whole point of walking through an assessment and then helping create the verbiage that is used in the grant. So we're helping both sides.
Excellent. Jeremy, what's the process like for you? Clearly, there was an immediacy with the ransomware attack to secure funding for that. But going forward, what was the process with your organization, and what tips and tricks might you share with the audience today?
Sure. Well, no organization wants to spend money unless they have to. So it's a little tricky sometimes to buy in and be proactive, or have your administrative team, your cabinet, be proactive with that. And in our situation, we weren't very proactive, and we had our attack, a ransomware attack, and at that point we had to recover, had to get systems back up online, and the pocketbook opened, and they found money for us just because we had to. But going forward, we have used grants on occasion, not very often. A lot of neighboring school systems in Indiana do use grants heavily. We have relied ourselves on budgeting through capital projects. And more recently, we have, as a school system for multiple areas, including cybersecurity, have relied on what we call general obligation bonds, or GOBs, where we're paying off our debt at such a decent rate. We don't want to lower our tax rate. But with the debt falling off, you have to do something to fill in that gap. So a general obligation bond allows us the opportunity to sell bonds to our constituents, and then that money raised funds things such as our cybersecurity plans and all of the equipment and programs that go along with that. It's a great way to fund projects if you're able to with that GOB.
Excellent. Excellent. And I can speak from some of our experience with clients. We know that many clients can buy hardware with E-rate programs, and E-rate does not cover software solutions, which are often kind of the last mile that you need to execute and optimize, execute a cybersecurity program and optimize the investments and technology that you make. So one of the things that we look at is, if there's an E-rate season happening, at least for people who are forward thinking, if you can put together some other types of adjacencies as far as solution sets, software services that might complement it, it might fit in the same kind of workflow path for approval. And as Jeremy said, there's a lot of different constructs out there. We think cybersecurity is essential. It shouldn't be kind of just when we happen to have a grant coming, but if the grant's the vehicle to get started, then we think that's a great way to pursue it. One of the things that we've looked to do to help clients is to understand how to create ROI calculators and business cases. And I know that we didn't notify you prior, but there is a bit of math in this webinar. So I want to make sure that you're okay with that. There's no formulas. We're just going to give you kind of high level on this. But one of the things we found to be helpful is at least quantifying what the potential return on investment is versus the cost of implementing a more complete cybersecurity approach. And we built some of these tools. I've had experience doing this for many years. I won't tell you how many years, you can guess. But one of the things we want to do is make sure we understand how to quantify the impact of a breach on someone. And what we don't put in here is, some of the things like that when you really just have to resolve something, you have to go and spend some heavy money up front. However, if you look at that type of money, the average cybersecurity incident now is costing around $2 million. Now, that's from downtime, that's paying ransoms, that's from recovery time, that's from staff costs, overtime, extra staff needed, settlements, there's, a lot of times illegal things. And then there's, of course, reputation or lost business, which is not always what you find for a school, but I will say that's something that affects every organization. The allocations here, they may change based upon your environment, but we're finding that for almost every organization, $2 million is about the average cost of a ransomware attack or a significant breach. And what we find is if you actually have the ability to quantify the license fees for software, and when I work with Rod and the ACP team, we often put together a more complete package. It could be hosted services or professional services, things of that nature. There could be other software updates or other hardware that we think is a more potentially valuable security solution. We're going to recommend that. But what you find is, and we're happy to share this information with you, whether you want to work with us or not. We're happy to share this information so you can use it to help justify and create parameters and business cases that make sense for your environment. And we've actually got two elements to this ROI analysis. The first is actually looking at the license fees, the setup fees, the internal resource fees that would, be part of rolling out a cybersecurity solution like the one we provide. The other is if your school district's large enough and they think they want to set up their own SOC, what would the cost be for that? So we try to quantify that. And there's actually some things on our website around these things as well. I'm not trying to push you to use this method, but I found this method is consistently helpful across many industries, many different types of environments in providing a framework for analyzing the best path forward from a budget perspective and a value perspective. And again, these types of ROI calculators allow you to give your management or as a management leader the ability to, again, quantify and calculate and represent things in a more effective way. And some of these things might be helpful for grant writing, some might be helpful for capital budget expenditures, some might be helpful for strategic planning, but in all cases, our ultimate goal is to give you cyber resilience. So we're trying to use these tools as ways in which you get a path there. And I want to comment on how these tools actually can mesh with something Rod mentioned. One of the key elements of normalizing measurement and risk ratings in the entire IT space is the NIST cybersecurity framework, the NIST CSF. And this is something where Ray Hicks, the founder of UncommonX, was a contributing author, right? So this is a tool that, independent of any software, you can use to do a survey type analysis of an environment. You can quantify potential areas of weakness, you can calculate potential areas of strength, and you can put some risk ratings together that help give you a roadmap for where you can provide more security in your environment. And what you can do with these then is say, oh, okay, if I've got a weakness in firewalls or I've got a weakness in best practices, I can then quantify the cost for those more effectively and show how those in these methods that I'm sharing with you can be used to justify a purchase or prioritize the use and allocation of resources. I think that's a really important thing because no matter what we talk about, at the end of the day, someone's going to ask us to quantify the value, and we're going to have to show them what the risk and the reward are for engaging in such a solution set. Make sense? All right. Rod, Jeremy, you guys, anything else on this? All right. So I'm going to wrap into our final stretch here. And this is really what we want to make sure everyone has today, how to promote cyber resilience in your environment. We want you to look at these best practices, and we want you to understand how a solution can provide more value for you. So, Jeremy, why don't you go first here? I think you guys have been, since your 2019 experience, you guys have been pretty much on the cutting edge and the leading edge of, thoughtful, planned, proactive engagement. Can you talk about how these tips and tricks have helped your organization promote resiliency?
Sure. Well, in the state of Indiana, most insurance companies have now required multi-factor authentication on endpoints. I'm sorry, on end users. So we have instituted multi-factor authentication. Just gives a different level and layer of security there. When we were hit back in 2019, we actually thought we were in pretty good shape, not really knowing that we weren't. And it became painfully obvious after our attack that we were really not prepared for anything like that. So, Rich mentioned a 24/7 SOC. We have implemented that along with our partners at UncommonX. And one of the nice things about that is that we are getting notifications when something happens. An example of that is about a month ago, we had a situation where we needed to change some passwords, and we changed 300 passwords all at one time. Didn't think anything of it. We were just doing what we needed to do. And within 3 minutes, we had a phone call from UncommonX letting us know that this event happened and asking if it was a planned event. So it was, and everything was fine. But just knowing that peace of mind is there, that they're watching out for us when we are at work and when we're at home, has been wonderful. Of course, endpoint protection and response is wonderful on all of our machines, and we get notifications on a regular basis. One of the things that I think is the really one of the most comforting pieces for me is we have a monthly meeting where we go over everything happening in our environment. Do we have any unusual logins? We have some passwords that appear to have been compromised. Our Google environment, these things are happening. And having that monthly meeting is really a great tool for us to see how we're doing in our environment and getting our best practices in line with what we should be doing. So, and that's basically a couple people from my team, a couple people from the UncommonX team working virtually together at the same time. So it's real people, and they're looking at our data in real time. So, and Rich, I'd be happy to keep going if you'd like, but I don't want to take up all the time. But of course, backups. We have backups in the cloud and on site. They're immutable backups. I think that's very important. Incident response plan, I could reach up and pull ours out here if I needed to within a moment's notice. I have a copy at home as well. So those things are important, as they mentioned. I just reiterate that as something that we should be doing if we're not already.
Definitely. That's great, Jeremy. I really appreciate you sharing the detail here. This is good. And I've been in your organization physically within the last month or so. So, we see what's happening down there, and you guys run a really good shop. And so we're really pleased for the feedback and the participation today. So thank you.
You bet. And Rich, just a couple more things, just simple things that don't cost any money. Vendor accounts, if they're not being used, disable them until they need to be used. And also taking your ports and disconnecting those ports that aren't being used so that somebody can't just walk up and plug in and get onto your network. Again, those don't cost any money. Things we hadn't thought about, but we, since our attack, have implemented here in our corporation. So.
Yep. That's a great thing. It's interesting, the vendor accounts piece, and we're working with another educational institution. It's actually higher ed. And one of the things that we're doing for them is helping them to understand and get visibility to the preponderance of third-party applications that people are buying, licensing, and accessing on their networks, many of which don't go through a regular process and don't necessarily rise to a level of like an EDR or an alert type engagement, right? Yet they could be exfiltrating data. They could be, compromising resources. They could be consuming resources, right? And they could actually be licensed in ways that aren't, kind of copacetic with the policies of the organization. So that's another area that we're helping clients to do things on. And to your point, Jeremy, some of these things can be done by just implementing best practices and asking questions and following some basic checklists. Other things are a little more broadly pervasive, and systems can help with that. So that's a really good contrast. And we're seeing what you're talking about is firewalls are tightened up. As email security gets better, as people understand how to manage their ports and their access points better and their cloud apps better, there's still all these other areas of kind of human interaction and access. We want everyone to have a free internet for all, but guess what? It becomes a free for all sometimes. So, Glad you like that. So, so Rod, I mean, you've worked both as an expert with ACP delivering solutions, but you've actually managed and run solutions for large organizations too. So, what might you highlight for the audience, from this resiliency approach?
Thanks, Rich. I think Jeremy nailed it, right? He's spot on with these are the things that are must do. I would say that there's a foundation, but somewhere below that. Often I'm still speaking with organizations around asset management specifically, and when I ask to understand how they're managing their assets, how do they know what's in, what's out, what's on their wire, or wireless, and really just understanding what's on the books or not on the books, what's walked away and what hasn't. A lot of these are still kept in spreadsheets, and people are really proud if they have them in a SQL database, which is maybe a step forward. However, they're not necessarily seeing in real time where those assets are moving, and are not able to necessarily distinguish on their networks if the device is theirs or not. And I would say that is really table stakes for so much of the other work. And any of the frameworks that are worth their salt, you're going to start with a discovery standpoint, and that's going to have that's really going to be around understanding the inventory of things that you own and that you're responsible to maintain, and that's systems and that's people. So that's the credentials that are being used, and it's the assets that are hitting the wire. You need to have that as a starting point so you can focus your efforts on building out the rest of the capabilities that Jeremy enumerated, plus others. And I would say that part of the reason that as a partner with UncommonX, we're also a customer of UncommonX, is because that was table stakes for me. I need to be able to understand what is part of the infrastructure that we're protecting internally. And then that's where I like to have a conversation with our customers. There's no ridicule. There's nothing negative if you're still in a spreadsheet, but there is an opportunity with a very quick installation to have full visibility of everything that's on your network.
Yep.
I would say if that's something that's intriguing, there should probably be a conversation after, and we'd love to join you.
Sure. Rod, that's great. And I appreciate that. And I think you're right. Like, if you're going to know you have to know kind of what you're working with in order to really make good assessments, because you have blind spots, that doesn't help at all. So I think what you're saying is important. One of the things, we have a question here, first question from Ray from the LC school district. I'm sorry, Ray, I don't know off the top of my head exactly what school district that is. But his question's in the Q&A area, and his question says, I'd like to enforce MFA for staff Google accounts. However, getting some pushback due to not wanting to school-related applications on their personal devices, such as Google Mail or Authenticator. MFA is currently optional to enroll, but he's considering implementing this as a part of a compliance for security. What suggestions might you offer him?
I can jump in with what we've done in those situations. We don't use Google Authenticator. We use Duo for our multi-factor authentication. We recommend people use the app just because in our buildings that gets the best network availability on our wireless. But if they refuse to do that, they can use their cell phone for a text message. They can set up and have their office phone or whatever phone they use during the day. And if we want to go far enough, we can get a little YubiKey and stick that in the machine where they just touch it at the right time when it's asking for that authentication. We don't recommend those, but we will do those if people absolutely refuse to put this on their phone. But we also have to remember, these people have other things on their phones already. They're doing that with their banking information. If they have an iPhone, they're doing that every time they get into their iTunes account or on the App Store. They're already doing those things. And we also spent time making sure staff knew that we're not collecting any data or information. It's just trying to verify that it's you.
Yep.
So
that's helpful. And Ryan Barnbrook from Elkhart Community Schools, who's also one of our clients, commented that they've had some of the same concerns. And he said, but by far and large, there were very few users who actually pushed back, and they did purchase some physical keys to use for the holdouts, and they ended up passing only 2 out. So that's pretty good. That's good. I mean, I will say the human factors and social engineering are really challenging. I mean, we're all wonderful human beings, but boy, we can make mistakes with that click through or that, that inadvertent, password compromise. And next thing you know, you're in a heap of trouble. So, and that's not mathematically quantified heap, but anyway, these are basic things you can do. And I think in, our last year here, well, we have an amazing software platform that gives you visibility, as Rod said, and everything on a network. We can interpret any kind of, aberration or anomaly or alert that comes through. A lot of the focus we've had on these monthly meetings that Jeremy mentions is best practices training and enrollment in things that will make a difference that systems can't necessarily prohibit. So that's a really important point.
I just wanted to chime in on Jeremy and Ryan both. I was going to chime in that the physical keys are a bit of a stick, and its stick is not necessarily for the end user, because I do definitely see this argument diminishing because, as Jeremy said, people are become more accustomed to this as banks are requiring it, and you're seeing it everywhere. My grocery store chain is now requiring it to use it for paying with my phone. I would say that the stick part of it is more about the budgetary side of this for the administration and getting them to force that into the next level. I would say that there are going to be circumstances where people are going to want to use flip phones and they may not have the capability, so you'll have to have the physical key. But again, you want to keep that purchase down, as Ryan said, to a minimal. And over time, you'll see people adopt. It's just that holdout number is dropping drastically. These are proverbial, the IT adoption curve or the technology adoption curve. The laggards are fading, if you're familiar with the graphic.
Right. It's true. It's true. Well, I would also point out in this last thing about promoting cyber resilience, as I mentioned, it's really a combination of technology and best practices, and it takes careful planning, and you can't do everything at once. However, one of the things we found to really make sense, and Jeremy mentioned this, is have a strategic plan, have an understanding of what you can do and what your resources will support. And then you can go and make better decisions and better expense decisions, better risk decisions as you go forward. And one of the things that I find to be, so interesting about this marketplace is that, really security and IT are really not two separate things. They really are intertwined, and they have to work in concert together. So one of the things we really focus on is when we work with clients, we work on what's the rolling solution now, we work on a run book. That run book may have certain security policies needed, but the escalations and remediation, if we can handle them, or a client's, MSP handles them, or a services team handles them, we have to know these things. And so what we find is over time, these plans and these run books get more cohesive and more comprehensive, and the resiliency gets much better for that client over time. So, all right, well, we're going to move on to our final couple of slides here. We talked about the cyber risk assessment. As I mentioned, this is something that is very important, and it's kind of a normalcy, a currency in the marketplace. I will say some people practice it better than others. At UncommonX, we actually built this into the risk rating of our platform. So when you put our platform on your system, we will analyze every element, every asset, and we'll score it on the risk rating based upon the NIST CSF. But Rod's applying this in a very complementary way with some of his complementary cyber assessments. So Rod, I think this is a great thing that you've been doing with the clients for ACP, and want to share what's available to the attendees today.
Yeah, and just by virtue of attending today, we're offering a 30-minute block of time for me or one of my cybersecurity experts to sit with you and your team to go through the cyber assessment rubric, the NIST-based rubric, and the outcome of that, you'll know your maturity score against that framework, and it measures against the full analysis of the NIST cybersecurity framework, and you'll know where you stand in each component, and it'll start to highlight areas where you can leverage, our team and UncommonX or your own internal teams to begin positioning yourselves to a higher level within that maturity. These are things that I would say you all take time. And if there's no time, I'm in the middle of gardening season this year, so you'll have to bear with an anecdote there. But there's some fruit trees that I wish I had planted 5 years ago. And there's the old adage that the best time to plant fruit trees was 5 years ago, and the next best time is now. There's no time like now if you don't have a recent assessment to begin walking through this. Have a professional sit with you, ask you questions, drill into some detail. believe it or not, this is a very valuable 30 minutes of time. And it's informal, but there'll be some detailed analysis in the output. Likely leads to a deeper conversation, but it gives you a great starting point to know who to bring to that next level conversation. And so, Rich, I think that as you indicated, it is something that we've been offering periodically to our customers as needed. We have a much deeper component that we bring at a larger assessment that's more of an engagement opportunity, but this is just to get started. And so we'll do that with anybody that reaches out today, and just take 30 minutes, help you assess where you are. I would say that I mentioned earlier also that as part of grant funding, this was something that we do. We spent more time there, went into some more detail, but it was very helpful in building out, the verbiage that was needed to help support the grant writing process.
Definitely. And those outputs can actually inform the ROI methodology we've looked at, because for every organization, every state, every insurance policy, there could be different impacts. And so we can actually quantify more effectively if we have this rubric completed for your environment.
Right.
Great. Okay. So we are now at the place for Q&A. We've had a few questions that came in during the thing. And Clay Shannon has first person to raise their hand who wants the assessment. So we will definitely get back to you, Clay. Appreciate your participation and support. And we laugh, but it's like, this is really important stuff. Like this is kind of materially foundational, and it has to be a priority for people. So that's kind of our point here, is that, to Rod's gardening analogy, the best time to start is, a few years ago, and now the best time to start is today. So we'd be very happy to work with any of you on this. Do we have other questions here? And if you're shy, feel free to reach out to any of us individually. I think you can tell we're all pretty, authentic Midwesterners here who just, want to solve problems and do good stuff. So I really sincerely mean that. Actually, the collaboration you do in this space is, it's not transactional. It's very important and it's strategic. So we're happy to be there for you and be a partner for you. Jeremy, grateful as always to have you here. Any parting words that you want to share with the team?
I appreciate the invitation. I'm honored to be here, and I just want to say I've said it to Mike Sullivan and Nils at different times, and Rich, you've heard me say it as well. But once again, publicly, I appreciate UncommonX and their support of us as a school system, not only during our recovery, but continuing forward. And we're in a much better place now than we were 4 years ago, and certainly we're stronger and better. So thank you.
That's great, Jeremy. Thank you. Appreciate that sincerely. And Rod, we'll let you take it on home here.
I just a quick story. The other day, I had some work done at the house, and it was a couple of young Amish guys, and they had been notified by a letter that they had been hacked, or that the system had been hacked. The hospital had been hacked. He had twins there and complications. And he was there doing work, and he knew I was in computers. He didn't know what I did. And he said, what does this mean? And I said, well, for you, it doesn't mean a whole lot, man, because, they don't have, if you don't know, Amish typically don't have social security numbers. They don't have much of a web presence. They're not keeping their finances online. They may be ripe for identity theft, but it's probably the risk is pretty low. But he kept asking questions, and I knew about the hack that he was talking about. It was fairly local to me, and we talked about it for a bit. And I began to enumerate that if it weren't for the bad guys, I wouldn't be here doing what I'm doing. And then I thought about it more, and there's a component to, I think, what Ray, the founder of UncommonX, Rich, Nils, and the team that Jeremy highlighted, my team and the rest of ACP, that we're passionate, I think, about pushing back these bad actors. This isn't about revenue. This isn't, just a business that we've all, been fortunate enough to be, smart enough or dumb enough to get into. This is something that we really care about. We want people to be safe. We want them to feel safe. We want them to understand that all the gloom and doom that's in the papers, there is a way to push back against this, and we're here to help. And I'm not saying that to be trite. I recognized in my conversation with this young Amish guy that, man, I really, it reinvigorated me just over the last couple of weeks to realize how much I really do care about this. Because, you know, you do something for a long time, it's just something you can almost sleep through. You can't sleep through it. And I really do care about it. And I'm surrounded by a group of people that are of the same ilk. So happy to be here to join you guys today. And for those of you here on the call or watch this recording later, please reach out because we really do care. We want to help. Thanks, Rich.
Excellent, Rod. Thank you. I nothing else to say than I'm completely aligned with you as usual. So, yeah, we do love doing this stuff. I mean, there's some tough days, but you know, every day, honestly, it's a little bit different, which keeps it interesting. But you know, it's also a day when you can complete that day. You're like, yeah, we got something done here. We protected something. We reduced the risk here. We put a new solution in place. Like those are kind of fun things to do, right? Because they matter. They're not, like I said, they're not transactional. They're strategic and they matter because they impact a lot of people, their livelihood, their education. These things make a lot of value for what we do. So on that, I'm going to say thank you so much, everyone, for your attendance and participation today. Jeremy, Rod, as always, I'm sure I'll see you guys pretty soon. And, anyone else who's on there, please let us know if we can do anything to help you with the 30-minute assessment or even a broader detailed analysis of your environment, and we'll help you do apply these tools we've shared today.